I'm joined now by Paul Richardson, who's with Dana-Farber, and we're here to talk about the ASH FDA Joint Symposium that's going to be coming up on Monday, talking about some newly released drugs and the data that is just amazing that's coming out. And we want to talk about it from the clinician standpoint, and give us some idea, if you would, sir, Dr. Richardson, about really what you're going to be presenting and talking to the membership about.
Oh, well, I mean, obviously a very exciting time in myeloma. Remarkably this year we've had 7 approvals in 1 year, which is unprecedented, and that reflects a continuum of progress in myeloma that's built over the total of 16 approvals across the last decade or so, 12 years to be precise. And I think that this year's been a banner year for myeloma research. We've really been so pleased with the pace and a number of approvals. Remarkably, in the last month or so, prior to the meeting, we've been blessed with 3 approvals. One of daratumumab, one of a new proteasome inhibitor that's just in the form of a pill given once a week called ixazomib. And then the 3rd approval, which came through just last week, is elotuzumab combined with lenalidomide and dexamethasone. And of course, all of these have been talked about extensively at this meeting with the studies that have led to the approvals being presented. Specifically, the ixazomib randomized trial is presented as an oral session at this meeting. The updates on daratumumab have also been presented or are being presented. And finally, we were able to present the ELOQUENT-2 study, which led to the approval of elotuzumab just this week, as I mentioned, just yesterday, on Saturday. So the session is designed to help clinicians understand how these new drugs might be used. And what's I think really fun is that the FDA are coming to tell us how they viewed the approval of each of these studies leading to the registration of the drugs. And they'll critically scrutinize each of the trials and show why they felt that the efficacy boundaries were reached and that the approvals obviously followed. And then my partner and I, Dr. Vincent Rajkumar and I, are going to sort of frame clinically what this means. Vincent's touching on the upfront setting and maintenance and so on. And my job is to look at relapsed refractory disease and say to the clinicians in the audience, these are the kinds of ways you might think about using these drugs that now, thankfully have become available.
We had a chance to talk to Dr. Rajkumar as well, and I think a message that he was saying, and I'm hoping you agree with it, is that this is an important time for the ASH membership in general to not only be able to ask questions of the FDA, but it's also somewhat unprecedented for the agency to be meeting in this fashion.
It's wonderful. I mean, I think we're very fortunate because the FDA myeloma team, I think, are second to none. They're just top notch, and the fact is that they've been a pleasure and a privilege to work with, frankly, over the last decade because they're so engaged, they know the disease. Most importantly, they also really contribute. I mean, they recognize the importance. We've got an incurable cancer, second most common after non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the hematologic malignancy space, and obviously with an incurable disease that used to have a median survival of 2 to 3 years. We're now looking at median survivals of approximately 7 to 10 years, which is remarkable if you think of that, and a continuum of progress ongoing. So to have the FDA there saying, look, we're here to help, we're here to move this process forward that much faster, it's just unprecedented again. It's a reflection of real teamwork, and again, it's a privilege for me to participate in the panel.
You kind of want to look in the crystal ball, I guess, and say, well, we've made this huge step. Now the FDA is here at ASH 2015. Sort of what's next? What would be the next step for you as a clinician, but also in working with the membership and ASH coming together and contributing data so that we can really further the cause, so to speak? Well,
that's quite true. I mean, ASH obviously is the premier hematology meeting in the world, and it is at the same time obviously a marvelous forum for discussion of all of this, and it is the perfect place, I think, for not only the data to be shared, but the context of how to use these drugs to be hopefully framed in a way in which clinicians will find very useful with the ultimate goal of benefiting our patients.
Do you expect a lot of questions?
I would hope so. I mean, I think that the fact of the matter is it's a complex area, but it's an embarrassment of riches, if that doesn't sound too trite, as opposed to a zero-sum game. It's not one versus the other. It's how would you use all of these drugs? Because as I mentioned, whilst we're making great progress in myeloma, we're not curing patients. And I think we're in a very, relapsed refractory disease, which is what my area of particular interest is, a very challenging area. And it's very important that we have access to good new drugs to help patients live longer, because at the end of the day, once the patient becomes relapse refractory, myeloma is a very difficult area. So we hope this will be very helpful for clinicians and in turn really benefit our patients.
Would you comment on the off-label aspects and potential?
That's a very interesting point, Ed. I think obviously we're very fortunate in the United States that we have access to good medicines in a way that, for example, unfortunately, colleagues in Europe don't necessarily have. And I think it's very important to note that we are allowed, with good phase 2 data, to rationally put combinations together that could help a patient that much more. That's a huge strength in the American system, and one that should never be taken for granted, because it actually really does help. And I think that the opportunities there be with our FDA colleagues and talk about the label and how we would interpret that label and apply, I think really promises to be a very productive and fruitious two-way street.